Hello. Apologies for missing the new chapter yesterday, as Kapper-sama was unwell. Alright, today we'll have two chapters, 255 and 256. The girl with ash-gray hair spoke in a somber tone. Someone even more terrifying than the Dark King will soon emerge. The divine tree wasn't afraid, but rather disappointed, as it hadn't had any rest at all. It felt like a tiny slave being exploited by the universe. The divine tree rubbed its eyes. Huh? Has she vanished? It wasn't an illusion, nor a mirage. The divine tree was certain that the girl had used her real body. The divine tree reflected gloomily on her words that the battle with the Dark King was merely the beginning, and a stronger enemy would soon appear. It was true. Perhaps peace would only come when the divine tree had dominion over the entire universe. However, there was a slight problem. The divine tree didn't know how to fly yet, so it decided to set that issue aside for now. For the time being, it examined the gift, a primordial essence. It looked like a strand of spaghetti, only it glowed and seemed to wriggle on its own. The divine tree now had another reason to grow stronger, making the advancement to the sixth order an absolute necessity. Returning to the divine tree's replica in Sky City, where the replica stood, its consciousness had not yet returned. Though the replica's eyes still gleamed like headlights, it had remained completely motionless for a while. Seeing this, the human experts were also frozen in place. Thinking of leaving? You hadn't left yet, so how could they leave? Yalian, who was inherently impatient, could withstand the pressure of death for 5 minutes, but if it were 6, he would undoubtedly lose control. Sure enough, the time exceeded what he could bear. Yalian began to sweat, feeling an intense heat in his heart, and wondered why the mutated tree was AFK. Not only that, but the divine tree's aura and killing intent had diminished significantly. A fierce desire began to stir within Yalian, a desire to strike at the divine tree at this very moment, when it was so vulnerable. If he succeeded, Yalian would become exceedingly famous, and those who once looked down on him would have to view him with newfound respect. Wealth, power, beautiful women, and perhaps even a throne. No one would be able to stop him. The more Yalian thought about it, the more unbearable it became. He kept urging himself, I can do this. I'm a 4th-order super soldier. If I give it everything I've got, even a 5th-order enemy will surely die. He gritted his teeth, and his entire body erupted with pale green spiritual energy. Then, without holding back his killing intent any longer, his spiritual energy surged like a tidal wave. Yalian let out a terrifying roar, his eyes clouded by desire. The super soldiers around him were startled, as the intense killing intent sent chills down their spines. Turning to look, they realized that Yalian had gone mad. A super soldier from the China Federation shouted in alarm, Yalian, what are you doing? But Yalian only snarled back, Get out of my way. I don't care if you get caught in this. Then, with incredible speed, he shot forward, his face twisted with ferocity, aiming straight at the divine tree. Seeing this, the divine elephant and Xiao Ling observed calmly. The divine elephant remarked, That bastard is trying to ambush the divine tree, Xiao Ling. But Xiao Ling responded indifferently, Let him be. Yalian charged like a bullet, closing in on the divine tree in an instant. He swung his massive hand in what appeared to be a claw attack, pouring all his spiritual energy into his right arm, making it swell in size and glow with powerful spiritual energy. This was the moment he would make a name for himself. Yalian shouted, I'll be famous after this. The spot where the divine tree stood exploded, enveloped in Yalian's thick green spiritual energy. Yalian wasn't wrong. If a 4th-order super soldier uses all their strength and lands a full force blow on an opponent, even a 5th-order being would likely perish. The attack was so powerful that the other soldiers had to step back, cursing loudly, That madman! He's so desperate for fame that he's lost his mind. This madman is truly detestable. You could only click his tongue, realizing that this was the biggest mistake of Yalian's life. Yul leaped into the air, observing the scene below, which had now turned into a cloud of dust and smoke. Being the closest, Yul was the first to witness the aftermath, but his eyes showed no surprise. Yalian had been defeated at the very moment he attacked the mutated tree, his entire body bound tightly by black-purple roots. His limbs hung limply, and Yul knew that all of Yalian's bones had been shattered. His life force was likely already at zero. At this moment, the divine tree finally spoke. Sorry, something came up that caused a delay. Then, the divine tree tossed Yalian's corpse forward and declared, he deserved to die. It's over. Let's go. The body landed at Yul's feet. Yul merely looked at it without saying anything, as he had already anticipated this outcome. This was why Yul wasn't surprised. Someone like Yalian, who was arrogant and disrespectful, was bound to meet such an end. And now, a space opened up before Yul. Was he supposed to step into this? The captain of the Dragon Corp, witnessing the scene, shouted loudly, "Are you truly going to betray humanity?" Yul didn't get angry. Instead, he calmly replied, "If humanity wants to survive, we must find new ways out." Then, the true hero stepped into the divine tree's life space. No one could comprehend how noble his sacrifice was, a human's strongest warrior, willing to bear the label of a traitor so that humanity might have one more chance to survive. The divine tree raised its hand and announced that next, they would go to that place. The divine tree retracted the space, then tore open another space for itself, slowly entering. The dream of the blonde-haired man officially came to an end, causing him to grimace and mutter curses under his breath, lamenting that the divine tree hadn't even glanced at them. In the eyes of the mutated tree, they were truly insignificant. On the moon, a large tear appeared in the space, and the divine tree, with its massive form, was slowly squeezing through. Apologies, but within this cosmic space, the divine tree had to conserve its spiritual energy as much as possible. There it was, the laurel tree, shining like crystal. As soon as it saw the divine tree, it cried out in joy, "Master! Finally, I can see you." The divine tree spoke with a tone of sorrow, "Heavens, you are so small and fragile." But the laurel tree disagreed, shouting back, "That's only because you are so huge." Indeed, at this moment, the laurel tree was only as big as one of the divine tree's toes. The divine tree waved a branch and gently covered the laurel tree's head, saying, "We can catch up later. For now, I need to borrow your place for a bit." With that, the divine tree released a stream of refined life essence, allowing the laurel tree to absorb it quickly without losing much of the precious essence. The divine tree then sat down, feeling great about being on the moon like this. It didn't even need to breathe. At this point, the divine tree began to activate the skill Ancient Forest Descent, and a lush green forest began to grow densely around the spot where the divine tree was seated. The feeling of standing on barren ground was truly uncomfortable for the divine tree, but now it felt much better. Someone asked if this forest didn't need air to survive. I think that the respiration and photosynthesis processes of the divine tree species might only require spiritual energy as a substitute, and in turn, they would still produce CO2 and O2. The divine tree gazed at the strand of noodle, knowing that consuming this might not guarantee reaching the 6th order, but it would certainly bring it to the peak of the 5th order. Nonetheless, it decided to go ahead and consume it. Immediately upon absorbing the noodle, a terrifying amount of spiritual energy surged through the divine tree, erecting a massive pillar of energy that shot up into the sky. This was precisely why the divine tree had been reluctant to use the noodle on Earth. It would have drawn too much unwanted attention. Simultaneously, deep within the cosmos, there existed another tree, rooted in the very fabric of the universe. This was the true divine tree, heaven-reaching divine tree. The oldest ancient tree in the universe, its trunk supported the entire cosmos. It drew nutrients from the planets, and each of its leaves recorded the full life cycle of every living being until they died and fell, only to sprout anew when new life was born. This tree had slumbered for millions of years, but had been awakened by the battle between Uziyu and the darkness. Now, Uziyu's breakthrough had once again stirred it. The ancient tree sighed and remarked, "It has grown stronger again." Its eyes slowly opened, blood-red with a black ring around the pupil. At this moment, on the moon, the pillar of spiritual energy from the divine tree stretched tens of thousands of kilometers into the sky, shaking the entire universe. The divine tree below swayed, never before having undergone such a terrifying transformation. The spiritual energy surrounding the divine tree was now an unusual shade of blue. The divine tree's core tried to remain calm, but its eyes were narrowed in what seemed to be indescribable pain. Simultaneously, the divine tree's 8 internal spaces began to open, their energies intertwining. The divine tree exclaimed in surprise, "Are the 9 spaces merging into one?" 9 spaces? I only counted 8, unless we're also considering the external space. In the end, these spaces combined to form a new space, radiating a golden hue and exuding an extremely dense spiritual energy, which poured down onto the divine tree in nourishing streams. Particularly notable was the transformation of the divine tree's heaven eye, now blood red with a black ring around the pupil. The divine tree looked up into the sky, realizing that its spaces had indeed merged into a single space, and its heaven eye had reached a new level of development. Oh, it seemed to bear a striking resemblance to the eye of that ancient tree. The divine tree decided to examine this new space, suspecting that it might have turned into a chaotic mess inside. However, the scene within left the divine tree astonished. There was a tree inside, towering hundreds of meters high. The spaces had merged and yet remained independent. Was there a tree growing in the midst of these spaces? The other spaces were still there, but they were now being supported by the trunk of a tree, with their connections remaining tightly bound. The divine tree thought to itself, "Each world is nearly 500,000 square kilometers. How wonderful it would be if they could eventually merge into a single world." The laurel tree, sensing the overwhelming power radiating from its master, even stronger than before, asked, "Master, your spiritual energy is even more powerful than before. Have you reached the 6th order?" The divine tree simply replied, "Not yet." At this point, the divine tree had only reached the mid-level of the 5th order, and there was still a long way to go before reaching the 6th order. However, the divine tree had only consumed half of the noodle, so it wouldn't be long before it surpassed the 5th order. Why hadn't the divine tree absorbed it all at once? Perhaps it was because absorbing it all in one go wasn't ideal, as the divine tree understood that it needed to acclimate to the changes brought about by each stage of advancement. A transcendent evolutionary phase consists of initial, mid, and peak levels. Each of these stages, when surpassing the 4th order, brings about significant changes for the individual. Moreover, the duration of this evolutionary process was uncertain. Fortunately, this time there was no dormant phase to reach the mid-level of the 5th order. Suddenly, an overwhelming and overpowering presence shook the divine tree violently. A blood-red eye, so massive that it filled the entire sky, was staring intently at the divine tree. The divine tree's entire being was instantly bathed in its crimson glow, and it looked on in horror as the red eye asked, "Was it you who defeated Gugget?" The laurel tree, terrified, asked the divine tree, "Master, what creature does that eye belong to?" But before it could receive an answer, the gaze of the eye turned directly toward the laurel tree. Flames erupted and began to consume the laurel tree, causing it to scream in terror, "Fire! I'm burning!" In an instant, the ferocious flames had completely incinerated the young laurel tree. Seeing its subordinate being tormented, the divine tree shouted loudly, "Stop!" and unleashed the Ice Age to extinguish the flames. The laurel tree, its entire body scorched and withered, could only scream, "Master, Master, please save me." Even though ice had enveloped the laurel tree, the flames seemed impossible to extinguish. The divine tree's face darkened, unable to believe what was happening, but the flames even began to engulf the divine tree itself. The divine tree was the next target of that ominous eye. Staring directly at the eye above, the divine tree demanded, "Who are you? What do you want?" The eye didn't respond, instead mocking, "This mutated tree is so small and insignificant." Then, from its pupil, the eye fired a beam of red spiritual energy, like a laser. The divine tree was now burning even more fiercely than before, overwhelmed by an irresistible force. The divine tree disintegrated in that deadly fire, and the laser beam even sliced through the moon. Heaven and earth trembled as the blast split the moon in half, turning the entire planet into something like a burning ember. What kind of monstrous power could be this strong? The divine tree opened its eyes, drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. What was that? A nightmare? The divine tree lifted one of its branches to inspect itself. Oh, it turned out the divine tree wasn't dead. It was still alive. Meanwhile, the laurel tree remained intact and was frantically calling out to its master, urgently asking, "Why have you been standing there like that?" Only then did the divine tree realize that what it had just experienced was an illusion. Sweat broke out again, this time in relief. Thank goodness the laurel tree was still alive. But that hallucination had been so incredibly real. The entire moon had been cleaved in two. The divine tree suddenly wondered if that had been some sort of enemy illusion magic. Even after reaching the fifth order, the divine tree had been affected by such an attack. Although it didn't know who was responsible, it was certain that this was a being more terrifying than the darkness itself. Recalling the words of that being, "The battle with the Dark King is just the beginning," the divine tree now understood. Indeed, in the vast depths of this universe, there are entities far more powerful than the Dark King. With this realization, the divine tree decided not to wait any longer. This time, it would fully absorb the remaining half of the noodle. And so, once again, the divine tree erected a colossal pillar of spiritual energy that shook the entire universe, silently vowing that it must become stronger, ever stronger, because the true enemy was lurking out there, somewhere deep in the universe where Yu could not yet see. End of chapter 256.